because especially at like the middle school level, a lot of what we're doing is just whole group or small sections work.
Okay. Yep.
But I'm able with technology to be, hey, record this like one chunk of thing, send it to me, and then I'll immediately respond back.
Listen up, educators. Are you looking to take your classroom to the next level? The technological shift in education is happening right now. If you're looking to integrate technology into your classroom, you're in the right place. Welcome to Shifting Our Schools with your host, Jeff Udick.
This is Shifting Our Schools, episode 85, and I've titled it Music and Technology in Harmony. I want to welcome you back to Shifting Our Schools. Thank you for tuning in and subscribing to us in your favorite podcast player. If you're loving these conversations over the last few weeks we've had with educators, please stop by and give us some ratings in your favorite podcast player. Leave us a review if you could. It helps for other educators to find us, and we're all about sharing the learning here at Shifting Our Schools. So we appreciate anywhere that you could leave a review for us. It just helps the algorithms promote us so that other people can find us. Also, if you are loving these episodes and you would love to reach out, we'd love getting comments from you, our listeners. There's a lot of ways to do that. If you head over to sospodcast.org, you will see up at the top, there's a place where you can click on comments and you can leave us a comment on our SOS Flipgrid, a great way to be part of the community. You can also leave me a private response if you'd like to over there. You can send me an email if you'd rather do that. Or one of my favorite things is because sospodcast.org is a blog, you can actually leave a comment on an individual episode. So if you have a question for one of our guests or a question for me about a specific episode, a great way to do that is to leave a comment on that episode itself. And I'll make sure if you don't get it to the guests, I'll make sure that I can forward it on to them and hopefully get you a response. We're all about sharing and building communities here at Shifting Our Schools. That's why I love producing these every week for you. This week, I have a great conversation with Nicole, who is a middle school and high school music teacher whose love for music is only rivaled by her love for technology. I love it when I personally get to learn something new about a subject that I don't get to spend a lot of time working with teachers in. It's a great just learning from me over some of the struggles that music teachers have and some of the great ways that they can use technology and bring that into the music classroom. I think you're also going to learn a lot from Nicole. She's got a lot of passion. You're going to hear that for sure come through. And she's going back and getting her master's degree in educational technology at the moment. So she's got this great combination of music and tech. And I think you're really going to enjoy this one. And with that, on with the show. All right, welcome back to Shifting Our Schools. Excited to be here with Nicole, a music teacher, our music teacher in the cohort this year in Enumclaw. Always have to have our music teacher. We had Dan on earlier, who was the art teacher, and you're the music teacher. We got this nice rounded cohort. So welcome to Shifting Our Schools, Nicole.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we'll get started here by just having you introduce yourself and tell your story of how you got into education.
Yeah, so my name is Nicole Laborte, and I am in my 4th year of teaching ever. Enumclaw actually ended up being my very first school district that I ever got hired at.
Very cool.
And I currently teach choir and orchestra at the middle school, and then I'm the lone high school director for orchestra up there. But yeah, as far as how I got into education, well, it was actually kind of funny because especially with music, a lot of people go into music education because for some reason or another, they end up like not succeeding in a performance format, going that route. But I actually, probably my sophomore year of high school, really felt called to kind of go the more leadership and service-oriented route of music.
Very cool.
I had the opportunity, I actually auditioned for what's called the WMEA All-State Honor Groups. Which essentially you submit a recording and then you get selected to be part of this top group with this fancy clinician. And that was kind of like my eye-opening experience to what music could be at a higher level within an education system. Because I went to Kennedy Catholic, which is like a tiny private school, really small.
Okay.
So that was kind of my first experience of what the highest level of performing was in the field. Okay. And so from there, I kind of found myself really wanting to kind of strive for that level of excellence. And naturally, because of that, I was often the person that was like, hey, let's do this better. How can we do this better?
Yeah.
And so, of course, I ended up getting put into a lot of leadership roles. kind of leading the sections and taking on more of a mentor kind of position within my ensembles. And then right around, I think it was my junior year when I was taking like 3 music classes, my teacher's like, "What are you doing with your life? Like, you really love this and you're really passionate about it." And I was really starting to get really kind of enamored with this idea of sharing this kind of love that I have for music with others.
Yeah.
And so and they called me the high school music major because I was taking like a plethora of music classes. My senior year, I only had 2 academic classes, and everything else
Wow.
was music. And so then I kind of ended up, um, I auditioned for a bunch of places, applied to a lot of programs, got into Pacific Lutheran University.
Cool.
And yeah, it's a really tough program. We had 60 people start my freshman year. By
Hmm.
the end, only 14 of us graduated from that music
Wow.
ed class. And then from there, only 8 of us are still teaching.
Wow. Wow.
So yeah, so
That's
music is
incredible.
not the easiest route of things.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, no, I would definitely say that just getting the opportunity to experience it at the highest level and then seeing how you can get your groups to that point,
Hmm.
and wanting to create just really good art, like that's always been something that I really felt innately called to.
Very cool. So
Yeah.
how do you structure your classroom then? What does your music classroom look like? What is your emphasis, I guess?
Yeah,
For
I
you?
would really definitely say that for us, everything is kind of going towards that final performance.
Mm,
Performance is really the assessment that we have in the music classroom. So everything up until that, like we start early in the year, and it's a lot of everyone just kind of figuring out how to work together.
right.
Because a lot of kids will have a background, like maybe as a solo singer or as a solo performer, just taking private lessons,
Yeah.
or just singing with a small, school choir. Um, but it's kind of there's a couple month period of just kind of finding that gelling phase where you're kind of figuring out how to work within a group. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And how do you contribute to the whole?
Right.
So a lot of my class is kind of structured at first in the initial stages as kind of like figuring out what your part is within the whole group. What role do you take? Are you more of a leader, or are you someone who's just always super prepared?
Mm.
And then from there, it's a lot of, I joke and say, it's a lot of me yelling and saying, you can do better all the time. I kind of have both a great rap and a bad rap for being brutally honest at times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, I am the first to tell my kids if they suck and sound bad.
Yeah.
That sounds horrible, but I'm very honest with them. And in return, they're really honest with me with what their needs are if they're struggling.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is kind of creating that sense of collaboration and that sense of ensemble first, and then all with simultaneously essentially checking off all the standard boxes as you go
Yeah.
along. But for us, really, our kind of ultimate like end test. I mean, we have performance adjudication every year in March, and
Okay.
that's kind of our SBAC equivalent, where
Mm.
collegiate level instructors and people that are really well recognized in their field come in and essentially hear your group one day and hear what they sound like in that moment, and then
Wow.
work with. So a lot of what we do pushes to that. And then the springtime is more just kind of reaffirming that sense of ensemble and collaboration while getting to do the quote unquote fun stuff. Um, the stuff that's more, the pop tunes, the stuff that we can now apply all that good technique to and do a lot better than where we would have started if we had tried to do it.
Mm.
So
Very
yeah,
cool.
it's
Yeah.
pretty structured.
That's awesome. So talk a little bit about being in a one-to-one situation then in the math classroom. I think, a lot of music teachers, I think, um, you know, I've even had music teachers say technology doesn't belong in the music classroom,
Yikes.
um, I know, but I've had that said to me before.
Yeah.
But maybe talk about what does it meant for you? What has it meant for your music program?
Yeah, well, I think it's good to say too that I am getting a master's degree in instructional technology. So I do
Yeah.
strongly believe technology has a role in our future.
Awesome.
I actually have my own personal, like, I get so angry at people when they say that technology doesn't belong in a music classroom because my pretty much default response is you just don't know how it can be useful for you
Mm,
because you haven't
I
found a
love
way to
that.
do it yet. Um, I have found it to be life altering when it comes to not only just like the minutia of organizing all of the logistic pieces and being able
Right.
to communicate a lot more effectively to both students and parents, but I'm also able to assess way more one-to-one than I ever
Mm.
had been before. Because especially at like the middle school level, a lot of what we're doing is just whole group or small sections work.
Okay. Yep.
But I'm able with technology to be, hey, record this like one chunk of thing, send it to me, and then I'll immediately respond back. With this is what you can do to improve, or all the fancy rubrics that you can have with like Goobrick and all those
Yeah.
add-ons. Like it looks really pretty because I've took the time to set it up.
Yeah.
Um, I think people are so because music is so traditionally very specific and very I don't want to say standardized, but very there's a formula that you
Right.
follow. I think people get really scared when they try and go away from that formula because it's not what they were ever taught or the way that they were taught.
Sure. Yeah.
I actually have asked the question a lot because something that's really popular now is this idea of incorporating media and technology into performance settings. And that's something that I did in the fall. And I've been kind of asking the question of how no one's really taken the research to look at how that affects the audience's perception of what they're seeing,
Mm.
and then how it affects the performer's perception of how they experience
Ooh,
it.
I like that.
So I actually wrote a research proposal on that.
Wow,
So
cool.
that's because I think it technology has, or even media has the ability to enhance a performance beyond what it currently is in just its standard classic. Um, I think there's something to be said about adding visual stimuli into something. That being said, I do appreciate a traditional performance that's
Right.
just standard music, but I
Right.
think
But if you ever
there's
watch the halftime show at the
oh
Super
yeah,
Bowl,
yeah,
right,
yeah,
there's this whole
or
other
even
thing
like
going on.
or
Yeah.
even the fact that like many huge symphonies are doing these film score concerts where
Wow.
they
Yeah.
have clips of the videos going on back simultaneously while they're playing music, or
Wow.
video games concert. I mean, video games live is like one of the coolest things I think I've ever wanted to experience but never gotten to.
Yeah. Wow.
It's
Interesting.
yeah, I think people freak out because they don't want to deal with it because they feel it's more work when it's just a matter of finding how to make it work for you.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
like that. I like that. Can you give an example of like one thing that you've done with technology in that kind of idea, either around the idea of assessment? I know you've used it a lot for that assessment piece, or even in a way that you've brought in that media into your classroom.
Yeah, well, as far as assessment goes, I definitely have had. I actually did this really cool thing where I looked at all of my scores, which is kind of our textbook equivalent in music world, and kind of isolated the main issues that they would naturally fall into from a technical standpoint. And in the beginning of the year, I basically sent them a calendar of this is what you need to record for me from this piece, and then I'm going to give you feedback on it. And so I've been able to identify a lot of technical issues within individuals that
Hmm.
I wouldn't normally catch in a large group setting. Because usually, if it sounds good, I'm less likely to fuss with it.
Yeah.
But I'm also able to say, like, hey, this is a kid that naturally is not playing with the right part of their bow, or they're have a tendency to be on the faster side of the sense of
Tempo. Yeah.
pulse. So it's kind of made me more aware of what the strengths are of my individual players
Mm.
versus like this section as a whole is struggling with just this concept.
Yeah.
I'm
And are
able
you
to kind of
what are you using for that? Do you use Flipgrid? Do you just have them record the audio? What are you,
well, it's actually funny because we have Chromebooks in our district, right?
right?
So I have found that I am super frustrated with, oh my gosh, what is the standard one? Screencastify.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
super frustrated with Screencastify because it's really, really laggy and not very useful for what my
Mm.
purposes are. So I've actually been encouraging them more so to just use their phone to record themselves
Awesome. I love
because
that.
honestly, usually it's better technology than what we have,
Yeah, so
and it's
true.
usually more current. Like
Yeah.
I actually was considering using my phone to do this whole conversation,
Yeah.
if I was stuck at school still.
Yeah.
But a lot of them use their phones. Some of them or they use like their parents' devices if they have something.
Yeah.
Tablets too, but the problem with Screencastify is just really laggy. So I find that
Okay.
just
Awesome.
using like a regular videotaping device that is not their Chromebook, using an app like third party,
Yeah.
is a lot more effective to
And
get
so
that.
is it just audio or do you do a video with them playing?
Um,
What do you, both, either? Does it matter?
it depends on what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing a lot of with video just because some of the physical things that go wrong with people's playing,
Right.
especially on the orchestra side, it's a lot easier for me to see it that way. They hate doing it. They get really self-conscious, and they like
Yeah.
some of them are like, "Don't judge me for wearing pajamas," and I'm
Yeah.
like,
Right.
you know, like they always start it with like, "My bedroom's a mess, and I'm a mess, so just expect it to be kind of a mess." But yeah, well, and for the more like, if I'm doing more whole group assessment, I will just do audio only,
Okay.
just because I have a couple of devices in my room that I just click a button and it just records. Um, in our new facilities that we're getting next year, we actually have built-in microphones in our classroom designed
Oh,
to pick
nice.
up audio. So I just have to click a button and it records.
Record it.
It-
Oh, that's fantastic. That
yeah,
would
it's
be very
definitely
cool.
changed my life a bit.
And then do you use Google Classroom for kids to turn in those files, or do they just upload them to Drive, or
Yeah, I use
how do you
Google
manage that?
Classroom
Okay. Yeah.
just because it gets really easy to lose things if it's not through some sort of a system.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you get 400,000 files and then copies of the same thing over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Talk a little bit about, I guess you were already blogging before we started this. You were like the lone blogger in our
I
group.
know.
It was great. It was
Yeah.
when I was like, everybody's going to set up a blog. You're like, I've already got one. I've been blogging for a long time. Talk about your blogging experience, and we'll make sure there's a link to your blog
Oh,
in
sure.
the show notes as well. That's what
Okay.
we do to everybody. So you're right there with everybody else. But we'll make sure there's a link. But just talk about your experience with blogging, either through this course or just the way. Because I know you've also done blogging because you're in your master's degree now. You've used your blog to even reflect on that learning as well.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some, well, and keep in mind, I'm in the under 30 crowd too for the people watching. So, I'm part of the generation where writing online and kind of just thinking out loud through the internet is kind of just part of how I was, I don't know, raised. It's a cultural thing from
Yeah,
that, you
I
know what I
like that.
mean?
Yeah.
Like I just think back to MySpace where we would just pour out our souls in these online things and then have everyone judge you the next day when they're like, "Ooh, you're a mess." But like I think blogging is just something that I've always found myself kind of drawn naturally to wanting to write things down in order to process
Yeah.
because I know that sometimes I'm someone that when I get really passionate about something, I have a tendency to either just like randomly start crying and not be able to talk,
Yeah.
or it's not very concise nor eloquent in comparison
Mm,
to what I could write.
interesting.
So I kind of started, I've always kind of used writing as a way to kind of communicate and reflect in my practice and in my life. So blogging just is kind of a natural extension of that for me.
Oh, very
Um,
cool.
yeah, and I think there are times, there are often a lot of times where I will write something and then it'll just sit in my draft pile, not
Yeah.
because it's like weird, like it's not because I don't want to share it. It's more so that it's a kind of a safety net of like, do I really want to have this conversation with other people, or is
Right.
it something that I just want to kind of talk about in
Yeah.
my own head and process
Yeah.
through?
But the
And it's
learning
hard.
happens
Yeah.
in the learning and the reflection happens in the actual writing, not the actual pressing the publish button. Right. We had that talk a lot. The learning happens in the process, not the product. And people all the time, like in almost every conversation I have with people that are blogging, they're like, "Oh, I've got so many drafts." I'm like, "That's okay. You still went through the process to reflect and write down and to get to get your ideas down, whether or not you ever make them public. That's totally up to you. You can decide which ideas go public and which don't, but going through the process of writing is the important part. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it was almost very cathartic to be able to go through, you know what I mean? To just even
Yeah.
have that time.
Yeah.
And I'm like a chronic insomnia person. So like I'm up at 2 o'clock and I'm like, what am I gonna do? I'm thinking a lot. I'm gonna start blogging. So a
Yeah.
lot of my reflections kind of came from that place. I don't want to say like crazy place, but the place of like something is not sitting right or something is
Yeah.
making me uncomfortable. So I want to like try and get through
Mm,
things.
I like that.
Um, in an effort instead of just sitting and marinating on all of the thoughts running.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk a little bit about your master's degree, because I think you're the only one in the cohort that is now getting a master's degree, and you're doing it online.
Yep.
We were talking, we use Zoom to record this, and you're using Zoom with that. How's that been going back to school and doing your master's degree fully online, and comparing that to even the blended experience that we went through with this professional development cohort. What's just been your experience with that and online learning so far?
I love online learning
Yeah.
so much. Something because I'm that typical high cap kid that always wants to read the next chapter, even though the teacher is yelling at them to not.
Yeah.
So, I'm going through the University of North Texas actually, and they have an online master's degree essentially in instructional technology. And there's different pathways you can choose, and I chose the teaching and learning with technology track because it's kind of designed for classroom teachers. What you can go as fast as you want or as slow as you want. The program is essentially designed for you can complete it in 14 months or you can complete it in 7 years. It's totally
Yeah.
up to you.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and I'm kind of going in the nice sweet spot of I'm expected to graduate. I started last summer and I'll be done spring of 2020.
Okay, that's good.
So it's roughly 2 classes a term. But what I really appreciate about an online format is I literally just have to follow whatever the module tells me to do at my
Yeah.
own time and my own pacing versus having to sit and wait for someone to talk at me and give me the materials.
Hmm.
And I'm a very self-starter kind of learner, and if you give me a task and I'll just go, like you don't have to sit there and coax me to do something. And I usually have some idea as to how I want to do it after the instructions are given or presented. So
Yeah.
it was very refreshing to not have to feel like I was waiting for someone else in the room to do my work, which sounds
Hmm.
really kind of narcissistic, but
Yeah.
I really appreciated that it's very self-paced and self-directed. So then I could kind of gauge it based off of, oh, this week's going to be really busy. I'm going to front load it the week before. The thing that I would say is very strange about it, though, is because it was all online, I there were situations where I never talked to my professors at all.
Yeah.
I'd get the weekly announcement reminder email saying that, hey, these things are due, or you guys struggled with this concept, which you can find on page blah blah blah. But there were times where my last class, I was taking a statistics class, and I am so bad at math, and I'm sitting here trying to read this textbook and then be quizzed on it essentially within a week's worth of learning. And then I'm sitting here going, do I understand? I'm not really sure. This is timing me and I can't resubmit it. You can't take it back. And there's no other way to show that I've proven my learning other than passing this quiz.
Yeah.
That was the only, I would say, big drawback is you were really, at times, feeling really alone with just, you have to figure it out and hope that you figured it out.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't know until you did the assessment piece.
So compare that to the cohort blended learning model that we did with this PD.
I loved the being physically in the same room as people
Yeah.
3 times.
Yeah.
It made it more human,
Yeah. More
and
connection.
it, it kind of eliminated the sense of like, ooh, I'm literally could just do whatever I want at whatever pace I want feeling. Like I felt
Yeah.
like I was sort of being held accountable because I knew I would have to talk to people and
Yeah. People are going to say, so what have you done?
yeah, or someone would make a comment about a blog post that you wrote when you were half asleep and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, you actually read that. Okay. um, yeah, no, I definitely appreciated that we were going to be like, I could plan to know, okay, we're going to be at this point
Yeah.
physically face to face.
Yeah, that's good.
It felt more impactful for me because I didn't feel like I was just talking with some random person across the continent.
Sure.
It was actually a real group of people doing the same thing.
That you're going to meet face to face. So there's that accountability issue.
Instead of like this because we always have every class without fail starts with here's a discussion board where you're all going to introduce yourselves.
Yeah.
And it's the same canned conversation. Yeah. It just, oh yeah, I see you. You've been through this too, and we've never talked other than that one time you peer reviewed me, but then never submitted it. So I'm still kind of mad at you.
Yeah. Where do you see music education going with just the influx, for better or for worse, the influx that we're seeing of digital media? Like I think about now, there's hardly a singer that you hear on the radio that's not being auto-tuned, and every Disney movie is, most of the music is synthesized behind the backgrounds. Very few are using live orchestra. Some still are. There's still, some that do. Where do you see that filtering down as far as preparing kids for the music industry? of the future? Is the overlap in the music classroom? Do you think that stuff's going to come out through more of a digital classroom or technology lens? I'm just always interested to see, where do you feel like that's gonna trickle down, and what impact might that have on you or the music?
Yeah, I think that's a really loaded question because, there's a certain part of me that says the one-to-one teaching aspect, the things I can say as a human being from what I
Yeah,
identify in a student as far as their technique and struggles
yeah,
pedagogically,
yeah,
there are certain elements of that cannot be created with technology.
mm,
Because it's such a subjective feel. And of course, you didn't think of the Jeopardy robot, right? That
right,
is,
yeah.
yeah. So that would be really scary if they make a robot that can teach you how to sing, but which is in some ways karaoke in a lot of ways.
Yeah, right.
Um, but the idea that because it's a subjective field,
Mm.
I don't think you can truly eliminate that human part of it.
Ooh, I like that.
Because there's always going to be someone that says you sound like garbage,
Yeah,
but in the same breath, the person next to them might think you sound amazing.
yeah,
I mean, a great example is anytime we go to a festival, there's always a couple groups that I'm like, "Ooh, what are you doing? Like,
yeah,
that's real bad."
yeah,
But then you look at their ratings, and there's two people that said they did okay, and then there's one person that had the agreement with me that was like, "Yeah,
yeah,
that was really, really bad."
yeah,
But or even like I've taken kids like my own ratings at times. There's been groups where they've two group people thought they got a superior or like the best rating you possibly could get.
yeah.
The other person barely had them meeting standards.
Mm,
So, we can have all these rubrics and all this language that says you're checking these boxes, but
yeah,
at the end of the day, what that box is subjective.
yeah.
There's no right or wrong answer to get to
Mm. I like that. And you just made me think that my wife and I watch one of the TV shows, the singing competitions on television. And there are times where we're both sitting here going like, ooh, that person doesn't sound good. And then the judges are like, you're amazing. We're like, what are they
what.
hearing that we're not, But you're right.
Yeah.
It is like every once in a while, you're just like, really? Really? You thought that person was that good? And it is
Well,
very subjective. Yeah.
I think of okay, case of this is me gonna go on a mini rant, but Jackie Evancho on America's Got Talent a couple years back, she won the thing,
Yeah.
and she actually lit up Facebook and the American Choral Directors Associates page, where everyone was going on this like extended tangent rant about how bad it was for her to be an example of good quality singing for that age group. And of course, me, I'm like, well, but she won. Like, you can't deny that she won, so something must have appealed to America.
Yeah.
But,
Interesting.
from a vocal health perspective, there's a whole laundry list of reasons why what she was doing was really not okay, especially when everyone then tries to emulate her.
Right.
Like, if I had $1 anytime someone said, I want to sound like that one person from Glee, I just look at them like, you have no idea what you're doing. And you have no
Yeah.
idea why that's bad for you at the age you're at. I
Yeah.
mean, Adele like people emulate her all the time, but her vocal health is tragic. She has nodules all the time and has had to have
Yeah.
surgery to repair them. And it's because she's singing in such a way that for her, like now she's figured out how it works, so she doesn't have issues. But when you have like a young teenager trying to create the same sound, not only is it in the wrong range for where the voice naturally wants to fit,
Yeah.
it's going to be a hot mess and it's going to sound bad and they're going to be uncomfortable the whole time they try and do
Yeah.
it.
That's a good point. That's a good point. It
Rant.
reminds me, well, but it reminds me, there are certain things you do at certain ages and your body has to mature into that. I just think, when I was playing baseball, my dad wouldn't let me throw a curveball for the same reason, because your elbow can't take it. And, when you're young, you're 10, 11, 12 years old, you start to learn a curveball. Most people end up with, elbow injuries before they ever get through high school or into college, because your body's just not ready yet, right? Like, it's not
Oh
that you
yeah,
can't do it, it's just
it's
that
just
there are certain
bad.
that you learn. Yeah, you learn
Yeah.
to do things at certain ages for your bodies.
Right. Well, and it's like people, like a lot of kids actually start choir experience or vocal singing experience either singing pop tunes that they've heard on the radio,
Yeah,
or a lot of them actually will do like some sort of theater production, a lot of community theater groups, or some sort of play experience, which is not bad. Like, I think it's awesome for theater to be a thing.
yeah,
But when you look at the actual pedagogical, like the pedagogy of what's demanded on the voice for those kinds of things, it's completely opposite of what they should be doing at the age.
yeah, yeah,
And it's a hard thing because they come in wanting to sing Moana. And to be fair, I'm programming Moana in the spring for my sixth graders, so I am both a hypocrite and not.
Yes, of course.
It's so hard to not want to give them what they want to get
Right.
their engagement, but then at the same time navigate through the pedagogically, this is the worst thing I could do for you to have you find success long term.
Yeah.
And trying to explain that to a sixth grader is nearly impossible.
Yeah.
You know,
That's so
that
cool.
that instant gratification of wanting to sing whatever song's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
At the time. This would make Glee so popular, right?
Oh, and I hate to say it, but I was in the age group where Glee was a thing.
Yeah.
And the amount of kids we had coming into choir because of that, and like, oh, well, I want to do this, blah, 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 blah. And then the publishers were releasing all this material that was from the show, and no one could sing it because it was a bunch of demands that you can't do without like all of the auto-tune stuff and all the editing that they had, in studio.
Yeah.
So we're sitting there trying to recreate this experience, and it's just a train wreck. And all of us get really grumpy because none of us want to do it because it sounds bad. And then the director's like, I told you so, because she was telling us the whole time that we were crazy.
Oh,
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Nicole. Thank you for taking time out of your day to talk music education with us. And
Thank you for
a little
having
bit,
me again.
and a little bit about your own online experience through your master's degree. Congratulations on that. Good luck on that.
Thank you.
As you wrap that up. And I'm glad you're going into instructional technology. I think that's a fantastic pairing. We need more, music and arts industries to have that background. I just think that is so great. So thank you for taking time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Shifting Our Schools with your host, Jeff Udick. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit sospodcast.org, facebook.com/Jeff Udick, and on Twitter @JUdick. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time on Shifting Our Schools.